live. Happy, healthy, amazing day, friends. If you are looking to enhance your athletic performance, your longevity, essentially how you move, how you feel, and how you can improve the quality of your lifestyle, then this call most certainly will have some nuggets that will check some boxes for you. I'm going live here with Dr. Bob Rakowski, one of the best in the game of functional medicine, not only helping athletes like Evander Holyfield, Tyson Gay, Yao Ming, and a long list of A-list athletes across the globe from all sports imaginable. He's also been helping people who were sent home to die because they had information from their medical establishment that couldn't really do much for them. As let's be honest, a lot of that structure is based around managing illness, not actually creating health. So we're going to talk about creating health, the conditions for that, and also how does this impact upon your athletic performance. So we just had some amazing events in the Algarve recently with Dr. Bob. So grateful to have you over here so we can combine multiple elements of functional movement, functional medicine, jam it all together, have some fun, sweat together, move together, and learn new things about how we can up our game. So great to have you back on these calls, to have some conversations, to share with people who are all over the globe, who might want this information but cannot get to see us face to face. So thank you once again for joining us, Dr. Bob. Great to have you back in Houston. So how's everything being, the transition, getting back after your journey around the world?
Well, I got to tell you, it was an epic trip. You know, I just love Europe, especially Portugal. I'm amazed. You know, I had bread 4 different days, which is, I only remember the last time I had bread, and I came back leaner. You know, the scale and the body comp says that. So quality does matter. And in fact, that'll be pretty much our theme. You know, if we're going to get better, everything counts. The better the quality, the more it compounds and moves you in the right direction. And, you know, you make good choices, you move forward, and you can enhance every part of your life. You make bad choices, they all interrelate that way too.
Beautiful, beautiful. I'm getting distracted by the big brother, little brother syndrome going on here, Dr. Bob. Can I get you just adjust cam on your lead? Yeah, just tilt it. Would be great. There we go. Other direction.
I've got it.
There we go.
Come on, camera. What is it hanging up on? Well,
there we go. There we go. Now we're evening out.
Well, all right.
All right. There we go. There we go. Nice, nice. And, you know, you just touched on something, Dr. Bob, just about quality. You know, you can eat a bread, let's say in parts of Europe where the ingredients are closest thing to, you know, raw materials that have been, you know, freshly made, and the body recognizes quality. And when you try and mix that with a lower grade quality, like in the US, for instance, a lot of your bread is very, very heavy, and it's not really an option for most people who try to avoid those foods, because for the most part, they're chemical versions of what appears to be a food. So that's really going to trip people up when it comes to quality digestion, your energy, and really mental clarity as well, because all these toxins really draw on us.
Yeah, they do, you know, and it's fascinating. You know, we did a little reply to a post. You know, one of the posts on Instagram was don't count calories, do count chemicals. And the count you want for your chemicals is basically 0, you know, and someone refuted that. But, you know, I think the evidence is pretty clear. Since we started processing foods and adding additives and preservatives and God knows what, and genetically modifying things, the health of the planet has gone down very dramatically. Even when we start talking about gut health, you know, there was a researcher, they named a lymphoma after him. I don't know if he discovered it, Burkitt's lymphoma, but he was in Africa for decades. And when he came from the US as a gastroenterologist, it was so regular for him to be removing appendix, removing gallbladder. Now, appendix, that could be something that's infected. It's actually lymphoid tissue. Gallbladder is poor fat choices. But he said in his decades in Africa, we're talking decades, he never once saw a case of appendicitis or acute gallbladder issues. So, you know, if you just pay attention and look around, you're going to realize that what we've been led to believe is healthy is really not.
Yeah. Seems to be a delay on the line here, Dr. Bob. Don't know why, but you caught up. You looked like a dubbed Japanese movie there for a moment. So if you're starting to make any combat shapes, it would have been straight out of the 70s martial arts movies almost. But just when it comes to the athletes you work with, Dr. Bob, you talk about sharing these concepts around chemicals versus calories. that particular individual was none too happy about that. But this is the thing that some people just, I guess, are not open to look at the bigger picture of things. We fall in love with a dogma or belief system that's the way and that's the only way. But it's like saying, show me some scientific research around love. How do you prove it's real? There's some things that you can show research for and other things that you necessarily can't. But based on what you were saying, was you need to look at the quality of foods that we're getting into our bodies. Otherwise, you're going to be really, really struggling. And whether you're an A-list athlete, like some of the athletes you've been working with that are pictured here, you've done your due diligence. You've looked at different aspects of what does it mean to be elite? What does it mean to look at the quality of foods versus just looking at the calorie count for foods? Yes, that's part of it, but we need to look at the source of the foods. I'm sure all of these athletes that rolled into your office, Dr. Bob, were perhaps not eating as strict as they could be. And I'm sure you had to give them guidance on that aspect as well.
Well, it's much worse than that. They were following guidance of people that were revered as professionals. And, I'll tell this story. And, Evander, I don't think this is destroying patient confidentiality, but when he came into my office, and by the way, here's a tip, right? If you have an opportunity to work with a superstar, make sure that you do all that you can, because that person could be a gateway to God knows how much. And he certainly was for me. But anyways, he was in my office for hours and he says, I'm getting hungry. And I said, well, would you like a shake? We'll make you a shake. He says, no, I'll have my team get me something. And so he called to his team and he said, look, go to Burger King and get me a Whopper with cheese, fries, and a Diet Coke. And I just stopped right there. Now, his nutritionist was not there, and I became his nutritionist after that. But I called his strength and conditioning coach in, and I said, Tim Hallmark's his name. I said, Tim, Evander just asked someone to get him, a Whopper with cheese, French fries, and a Diet Coke. And he says, look, he did a consult with Barry Sears, who wrote the book, The Zone. All that matters is the macros. What's your ratio of protein carbs? If he eats half the bun, only a handful of fries, and he's okay with as much Diet Coke as he wants. And I said, absolutely not. And one of the things that we worked on him was acid alkaline balance. And those horribly processed foods don't have the ability to buffer acid, and they create a lot more acid. And I'll even take it a step further. We've all heard you are what you eat. I tell people that's kind of true. You are what you absorb. That's more true. You are what you don't eliminate. That's going to be most true. So when you start putting in extra things that the body needs to eliminate, all these chemicals, they don't have a function or a purpose in our bodies. There's plenty of evidence that they're related to illness, that they cause inflammatory process, that they burden the detoxification system. And you start looking at all that and realize, wait a minute, what I'm putting in my body helping me or harming me? And the food needs to be alive. It needs to be fresh. It needs to be wholesome. It needs to be, produced. I shouldn't say produced, grown, or I guess if it's an animal, we'd still call that grown, right? In an environment that does everything to promote health and life. And the stuff we get in a package, it doesn't meet any of those criteria.
Yeah, I can imagine that your facial expression when that individual was agreeing to get that shopping list. But you can't overlook the little things, right? It's the weakest, or it can become the weakest link or the chink in your armor, so to speak, if you're not, dotting the I's, crossing the T's, as you like to do. And you've mentioned quite often around the Magnificent Seven. We touched on this when you were here. We've touched on this over the years. But, I don't think you can reiterate the basics too often, because sometimes it takes repetition. I was only just speaking to a coaching client today about the power of constant spaced repetition. It takes time for you to master the Magnificent Seven. It could take you a lifetime to master this. So I just want to break down today really briefly, Dr. Bob, just touching on what were some of your takeaways and realizations and feedback from these events around the two pillars, the two foundational pillars of the Magnificent Seven, which is really to eat right and to drink right. because I knew there was a number of questions around this as well. Was there any new revelations around these first two areas that you touched on the day that was either new for you from the questions, or you saw a different aspect of it that you hadn't seen before, or anything that stood out for you in those areas?
Well, I'll tell you what stood out is when you start looking at people, especially in your area of Portugal. And by the way, I was also in Sweden and I was in Amsterdam. And I'll tell a story. The first time I went to Paris, which was in the 1990s, I was walking around and, I've got this, American accent, I guess. I never thought of me as having an accent, but clearly I was from someplace different. And people said, "You're not like most Americans." I said, "What do you mean?" They said, "Well, most Americans are fat and angry." I went, "Holy cow." And you know what? Maybe those things go together. If you're not optimizing what you're putting in your body to the point where you get extra body fat, you're going to be inflamed. That increases stress hormones, which is going to decrease happy hormones. And then when your metabolism progressively shuts down, understand that you don't just use your energy for singing and dancing or high level sporting activity. Your cells, first and foremost, use it for nutrient absorption, toxin elimination, and cellular repair. And then you look at the quality, and they used to call it the French paradox, but we might even call it the European paradox, that, they eat plenty of pastries, they have plenty of red wine, and yet you have a hard time finding a single individual that's obese. You and I were walking along the beach, and, then we were walking through town, and we're talking about a much, much, much fitter population than you see anywhere in America. Even some of the healthiest cities like Austin, Texas, not too far from me, certainly one of the fittest cities around, but yet they have plenty of fat there. And even Denver, Colorado, or the state of Colorado, plenty of hiking, skiing, things like that, plenty of fit people, but there's the opposite end of the spectrum. And I don't know if in Europe those people exist. If they do, they weren't on the beach. They weren't walking around town. They weren't in the restaurants that we went to. So how fascinating that just maybe even the difference of you outlawing genetically modified foods and limiting some of the horrible toxins like glyphosate, Roundup, which, by the way, in the medical literature is called an autism accelerator. So, you start looking at these things and you come to realize quality absolutely does matter.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with an environment where you are, and this is a gift being here as well, and why environment can be such a powerful thing, whether it is, a church group or a religious get together that you feel drawn to, or if it's a gym, or if it's a yoga group, or something that makes you feel part of a collective gathering and movement and familiarity and trust and love really for other people and yourself. It elevates almost your baseline of what health should be or can be. And I think when you're around more people, you're more aware of what is healthy versus what is not. And I think with, maybe I'm off on this, but I think with the convenience foods of delivery, home delivery, and the overemphasis of people being at home and using technology, maybe they're reclusive or don't really like being out too much, or maybe they're on a medication which continues to be multiple medications for dealing with a problem that could have been solved through quality food and good movement, leads to people being more reclusive. And I think with a climate like this and with the beach, people are more used to being around other people. So I think, yeah, environment makes a big difference, but the source of that food as well, especially when we touched on the nutrient value of the food versus the heavily marketed, the heavily campaigned, and the heavily addictive food-like substances that a lot of people just maybe once or twice say, I'll just get this once. I'll have a treat a couple of times a week. And then this becomes the foundation of their intake of food. And over time, this just spirals out of control.
Powerful point. Kelly and Brownell, Yale University's used these exact words. He said, food in this country, meaning the U.S., is engineered to be addictive. And they have these things called flavor chemists. I shouldn't say things, specialists called flavor chemists. And they can literally make a piece of cardboard taste like filet mignon. So, someone who is not in touch with their body might eat that and go, oh, this is so wonderful for my body, mind, and spirit. But, you get an athlete that actually feels the results of what they put in and how the body's doing. And, let's face it, a lot of these athletes, they're so gifted. They have so much buffer that they could probably handle one bad meal too. But if they do that consistently, they're going to impair their performance. And I promise you, be at a greater risk of injury and even early death. So everything does matter. And maybe food is the number one thing, because malnutrition has been published as the number one cause of death now for decades. And, it used to be that people were starving. I'm glad that's not happening anymore, but in terms of quantity, but in terms of quality, the vast majority of us are starving.
So alkalinity, Dr. Bob, this is something we touched on, because this is not just eating right for just everyday people and just being healthy, although the health is the foundation of that. So I would love to you to touch back on the power of alkaline foods for our health, and particularly performance. What difference does that make? What are we looking at here? Is it such a big deal to be focused on alkaline rich foods, or can people be more flexible within that?
Well, maybe my position on this has slightly evolved, because there are some people that do extreme diets like the carnivore diet, which in theory shouldn't be a very alkalizing issue, but their processes improve. There's so much nutrition in there that they seem to do pretty okay. But let's just go back to this whole concept of alkaline foods. Most foods are fairly neutral. So you start looking, and a pH of 7 is neutral. Anything above that is alkaline. Anything below that is acid. And you might think, okay, if I'm getting protein, high protein, that's all made of amino acids, I would acidify my body. But there are proteins that are buffers. There are phosphates that are buffers. There are minerals that are buffers. And high quality meat is going to have all those things in it. And so what tends to happen is the effect on your body might actually be alkalizing. And that's one of those tricks that we often ask. If I gave you a glass of lemon water, we could test the pH and we would show that it was acid. But by the time your body processed the nutrients within the lemon, it actually has an alkalizing effect. So maybe the best statement that we could give is the more whole the food is, the less processed the food is, the more alkalizing benefit you'll have. And let's go to the extreme. The more processed it is, the more incomplete and chemical it is, the more acidifying and intoxicating it is. And if you look at the number one toxin that we're exposed to, it is acid. And I shouldn't say exposed to, we make it. Every time we make energy, we make acid. A lot of people are familiar with lactic acid. That's a very strong acid, but the most abundant acid in our body is called carbonic acid. So every cell that processes oxygen for energy gives off carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide adds the water in the blood to form carbonic acid. And they estimate we have something like 50 trillion cells doing that 1 trillion times a day. So life produces acid. All of our elimination routes get rid of acid. So the last thing that we want to do is put things in our body that make it harder for us to handle the acid. Whole foods consistently make it easier, whereas processed foods consistently make it worse.
Yeah, let's look at that foundation, Dr. Bob, you just created through your years in clinical practice of just summarizing what this means for people to kind of get a handle on their foundations. Because if you get this, I mean, a pyramid is a pyramid because of the structure. I mean, it's not going to blow down anytime soon. I mean, show me a pyramid that was taken out by a tornado. It doesn't exist because it's designed so well. So the same thing applies to our approaches to our health. If you cover your bases, you build that strength from within. The likelihood of you being taken out early or having less quality of life is drastically reduced, because literally it is, like you say, it's not we are what we eat. It's what we are what we don't eliminate. Or if we eat well, we certainly take the best from the food, put it into productive use, and become a better version of ourselves and evolve that way rather than slowly being on this decline.
Well, this pyramid was a direct result of a PhD researcher bashing the USDA food pyramid with the statement, if ever there's a terrorist-like plot designed to destroy the health of the world, this would be it, with 9 to 11 servings of genetically modified, highly processed carbohydrate at the base of the pyramid. That's just not a really good idea. So there's no doubt that there's a lot of latitude based on where you are in the world and your activity based on your genetics in terms of macros. So if we were to look at the Inuit Eskimos, I mean, 80% of their diet's fat. You look at the Aborigines, they're going to have a lot more carbohydrate. You look at people at the in the Swiss Alps, they had a lot of dairy. You look at people in the rainforest, they're going to eat a lot of vegetables and fruits. And so the metabolic body typing diet is a good thing. And there's so many different types. You know, there's one body typing group that created 38 different body types. I think that's maybe a bit too complex, and therefore each 38 different diets. But the simple guideline is eat like your ancestors ate. And that's really the purpose of the metabolic typing diet. And then you showed later the blood type, which is pretty fascinating. And blood type happen to be from different people in different parts of the world. Now, Peter Diadamo is a guy that wrote a book called Eat Right for Your Blood Type. And I had, read that decades ago, and I thought, all right, I'm going to play with this. It seems to make sense that you should eat according to your blood type. And I'm a type A, but when I ate like an A, I lost muscle. I didn't have the energy. I'm an A that eats more like an O. And here's what I found. Blood type diets were most effective for O's, least effective for A's, in between for A, B's, and B's. And, is there something to it? I promise you there is, but why don't we go with just generalized guidelines like eat real food, clean food, and that would mean unprocessed food, not laden with chemicals, not too much, not too often, every color, every day, in a way that honors your physiology, your genetics, and your body goals, mostly plants. And by the way, I was on Eric Worre's podcast, a few months back. And, I went through that and he said, wait a minute, mostly plants. I thought plants have anti-nutrients in them. Well, of course they do. How else is a plant going to defend itself against predators? Plants can't run away. And I use the analogy, and this is just one of the wonders of nature. When giraffes, as a herd of giraffes, are starting to eat leaves off a tree, they're big animals and they're hungry. They could actually really destroy the tree. They could take away all the leaves. But there's a certain point in time where all the giraffes are eating the leaves, and suddenly the tree releases a signal, and a chemical is released that suddenly makes the leaves not taste good, and even gives the giraffe an upset stomach. And just like that, they stop. And it's fascinating that this signal appears to be propagated through the root system, or we might even call it the mycelium, since we're so big into medicinal mushrooms. And then all the trees get the same signal, and they collectively protect themselves. Someone sent me a cover of a book and asking me what do I think about people being poisoned by something called oxalates, which are in a lot of plants. And, here's what I'm going to tell people. We've known for 2,000 years, a guy named Lucretius said, one man's food's another man's poison. But if it's a whole plant grown in good soil, I'm going to say that for the vast majority of people, it's going to be pretty good, but nothing is good for everybody, period, end of story. So if you have a body that's very, very sensitive to that, you want to avoid that category of foods, but it's certainly not the majority of people.
Right. Yeah. People can get kind of lost in the weeds too much. I think once again, if they fall into, I have to eat this certain way, I think having a baseline, I think that's very, very useful. That those two charts actually to help people identify, and there is a questionnaire with this as well to kind of look at your tendencies or what you feel better eating at what times of the day to determine which category you may fall into in this regard. But I think at the end of the day is, like you said, about real food, whole foods. Keep it, within those experimental ratios for you to feel your best. And if you don't feel good, then you want to look back at some of the ratios of the foods you got and either reduce or increase either your protein or fat accordingly, and then pay attention to how you feel rather than just getting caught up in the numbers, because that's not how we've evolved. No one was running around as a hunter and gatherer and stopped and asked how many calories is this going to be. They just ate whatever they could. So we don't want to go down that route either. So we want to get a happy middle ground. But we're just touching on the benefits then of alkaline-rich foods for athletic performance. Anything there you want to touch on that you feel is particularly relevant for people to really know and hammer home?
Well, maybe we'll take it piece by piece because it's very, very important. So one, they start talking about bone density, and we know that calcium is an antacid. And if your body has too much acid, your blood is very, very tightly regulated. Calcium is a huge buffer and it's abundant in the bones. So what a lot of people will do when they get too acid is they'll actually start to demineralize the bone. And this goes back decades ago. I actually filmed this girl, but at age 25, she had full-blown osteoporosis identified. And through the bioterrain, we could tell that her body was very, very acid. We gave her good exercise, an alkalizing diet, and comprehensive bone supplements. By the way, you don't build bone with just calcium. There's dozens of minerals. There's over 200 proteins in bone. And the more complete you are with the bone, like healthy bone meal, you can grow a lot of density. We actually added 18% bone density in a single calendar year for this young lady, which the doctors thought was medically impossible. When we start looking at muscle mass, understand that every single hormone in our body, including our anabolic hormones, and by the way, insulin is anabolic. So there's this idea of nutrient timing. If you're going to have some carbs, the time to have it is after you've depleted glycogen from your muscle. And that means you were anaerobically really pushing hard. That could be CrossFit, that could be intense strength training, something like that. But as we keep the body alkaline, then we get better at receiving all signals, not just the anabolic signals. When you start looking at chronic illness, as acid accumulates, our systems become inefficient, including our immune system, and then we progressively fail. Most of the cancer patients that I look at, they have profoundly depleted acid alkaline buffer, and that's one of the first things that we need to improve on them. And when I see a patient that is nowhere near as extreme as the others, I smile and I say, you know what? I think that what you've done up to this point to keep yourself healthy gives you a much better chance of winning this battle. And I think I can say accurately that the cancer patients I've seen that are the least acid, and they're all too acid, have done the best under all forms of care. When you start talking about tumor invasion and metastasis, that's a quote right from the medical literature. It says if you alkalize the environment around the tumor, you decrease the probability of invasion and metastasis. And I'll even give another. It actually improves response to therapies like chemotherapy and radiation. And you know what? We have data on things like reishi, the most alkaline food on the planet, improving response to chemo and radiation, which means it should be a standard of care really for anybody fighting their life, but especially with cancer. And then you start looking at toxin excretion. The kidneys do something very, very fascinating. When the urine becomes even more alkaline, it's more likely to bind acid type toxins and get rid of them. And those are clearly the most abundant within the system. So you look item by item, and there's many more than that, but these are the things that are called out by this one study. Anybody that claims to promote health by way of nutrition needs to understand the critical benefits of proper acid alkaline balance. And let's face it, most of us, or everybody I've seen in 30 plus years, is at least a little too acid. The healthiest people have the best buffering. The sickest, well, they have the worst.
I do remember you mentioning that at an event, actually, first of all, when it came to this man beating Usain Bolt in the 100 meters. And I asked first, I was curious because I always want to work better. I'm understanding what are the key factors that you can notice with elite athletes, but particularly here with Tyson Gay in the bottom right corner, for you guys who are not familiar who that is. You mentioned you balanced his core and balanced his pH because this core was off and he was probably running a little bit more acid. How were you able to do that in your clinic, Dr. Bob? What kind of interventions do you use alongside, of course, I know you mentioned reishi as well. It's one of our favorite daily routines.
Well, when we talk about balancing the core, and by the way, one of the things we also did was do a stress reset because his sympathetic nervous system wasn't as responsive as it should be. And, sometimes the sympathetic nervous system can respond beautifully to balancing, especially the cranial and the skull and the sacrum. Now with Tyson, he had a shut off in his core that was affecting a hip flexor. That probably took away some of his power. His blood pressure didn't respond like his eliteness would suggest. When someone's lying down, their pressure should be lowest. When they stand up, the pressure should rise 6 to 10 points. Elite sprinters rise much more than that. Tyson didn't. And, I remember when I did his pressure lying to standing, I said, "You're slow off the line." He looked at me like I was nuts. He said, "I've never been told that before." And I said, "Well, I'll tell you what, we can make you faster based on these numbers. Here's what should happen." Now, here's the nice thing about, paying attention to your own health and knowing your own numbers. I didn't do it at this time, but I said, "Tyson, I'm nowhere near as elite as you. But if we take my blood pressure lying and standing, I have a better response than you do." And all that means is if we tune you up a little bit, you're going to be better than what you are. Now, in terms of what we do in the clinic, if we can activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is affected by the skull and the pelvis, and by the way, the sympathetic nervous system, mostly the thoracic spine, if we have issues there, it can create nervous system imbalance. So we did balance the core, we did balance the nervous system, mostly through supplementation. But one of the things that I've told people for a long, long time, and you said something similar in our intro or part of this early part of the conversation, bodies do respond to frequency, duration, intensity, quality, and timing of stimuli. When I have someone that wants fast change, and that's most people, I will have them dose nutrients every waking hour. And so why do we do that? Bodies get rid of things quick. If you look at pharmacology, there's something called the half-life. And the longer the half-life, the more toxic the drug. Since nutrients are not toxic, the body clears them very, very quickly. So the half-life of even something like melatonin is an hour. So when we're doing a stress reset, we do it every waking hour. And this is a strategy that I came up with years ago. I realized, wait a minute, if nutrients are safe, why would I give, something once, twice, maybe 3 times a day when I can continue to stack the benefit with frequency, duration, and intensity? And when I started doing that, I had hard measurements that my patients got better faster. But the beautiful thing about track and field athletes, and I've got an interview that I videotaped with an Olympic coach, and he said this: all of my athletes, and we're probably in the hundreds at this point because he's an Olympic coach that he sent over the years, they've all had a personal best or season best within 2 weeks of their first visit of me. And why? Because we're going to reduce their stress, we're going to reduce their toxins, we're going to alkalize them, and we're going to enhance their nervous system function. And when that happens, people just get better.
Beautiful. I love that. So 2 other things when it comes to eating right, and we will touch back on medicinal mushrooms as well, because that's such a foundational strategy that we share with the world, and we do so quite passionately. But intermittent fasting and food combining came up in conversation from our events as well, because not only does it have the benefits of allowing our system to just recover, it also has some powerful data on longevity as well. So I'd love you just to touch on those points as well and what we've seen so far in the medical literature.
Sure. For those that are watching on Facebook, there's a slide about autophagy, which was a process that the scientists that really elaborated on it won a Nobel Prize in 2016. And very, very simply, if you're not eating food, it doesn't mean your body's doing without fuel. It starts essentially cannibalizing itself. And that's literally what the process autophagy means. Auto means self. Phagy means to eat oneself. So, I asked at the events, where do you think the body's going to start? Is it going to eat your brain first? No, that's life critical. Is it going to get your heart? No. How about your liver? No. How about your kidneys? No. How about dead and dying cells? Absolutely. And so the journal Carcinogenesis published this, first time I saw this, 1999, was that in an extended fasted state, when the body starts cannibalizing itself, it has the wisdom to eat the sickest cells first. Now, keep in mind, if you're routinely getting rid of sick cells, do you think that would have a health benefit? And that goes without saying. Of course it does. Do you think that have a longevity benefit? Of course it does. And these now have been proven beyond any shadow of a doubt in the peer-reviewed medical literature. But what preceded this Nobel Prize was one in the early 1930s. A medical doctor by the name of Clive McKay with Cornell University realized that when he would cut animals' calories in half, they would double the life expectancy. Now, you don't want to do that with humans too early in life. You don't want to deprive a child of nutrients because you'll stunt their growth. But once you're fully grown, if you eat fewer calories, you will absolutely live longer. Now, I was surprised that this phrase isn't universal, because I grew up hearing this all the time. You know, the little old lady, the little old man. We don't hear the phrase big old lady, big old man. And maybe in Europe, you don't talk about the little old lady, little old man. But why don't we say big old lady, big old man? Because big people don't get to be old. Or if they do, you know, they're in medical disability and under constant care. So obesity is a risk factor for everything. It's even the number 2 risk factor for cancer, second only to smoking. So, you know, friends don't let friends get fat. Friends don't let friends eat garbage. Friends don't let friends, you know, use negative thoughts. You know, friends don't let friends sit around and do nothing. You know, we've got these beautiful machines that we've all been gifted with. And I don't know a single person that doesn't feel better when they're fitter. I've never met that person. I don't think that person exists. Now, can you overdo your efforts? Well, we've seen people do that too. You know, and I've been guilty of that myself. If I I tend to err on the side of too much. And I'll go to Confucius wisdom. He says, you know, to go beyond may be worse than to fall short. So, you know, entering this next decade of my life, you know, I'm going to work on that a bit more. I'm going to learn to listen to my body. And by the way, big shout out to you, because every single training session, and I've seen you train groups, and you got such a watchful eye and such a good eye to pick up the subtleties, but you're always asking people, ask permission. And you also can pick out if they're not moving quite right, their body didn't give them permission. And that's one of the best philosophies on movement. You know, you might even want to ask yourself, get in touch with your best self, your highest self, and say, you know, is this food going to serve me? Is this drink going to serve me? Is this thought going to serve me? Is this relationship going to serve me? And when you can answer that with your highest wisdom, oh, I promise you're going to be a better you and show up better for the world.
I think absolutely agree with you, Dr. Bob. Yeah, you've got to keep asking the question and listening. Ask, take action, and listen. You know, I think that's a winning formulation for a lot of things in life. You know, and it's the application of your, or the combination of your own thoughts, or your action on your own thoughts. Take some information, act on it, put it to practice, pay attention, and adjust accordingly. And you know, I think, just talking about food combining as well, sometimes I certainly noticed when I was combining starches and proteins that I would have, for the most part, I break the rules a little bit from my first meal when I have like maybe a little bit of an omelet and some bread. But every other meal in the day, I usually tend to have this food combining down. So I'll have my veggies and salads in isolation before as the first thing. But I'd love you just to talk about the importance of food combining. What was the concepts around it? And why is this application going to be enhancing gut health? And we'll have to wrap in a few minutes as well. I think we're only going to cover eat right on this call, Dr. Bob, and then let's look at some medicinal mushroom data around how it can enhance nutrients, bioavailability and whatnot.
When we start looking at digestive process, there's certain things that will enhance each other's digestion and other things that will interfere. You know, when we start talking about fruits, they're mostly water. The body digests those really, really fast. Those should be eaten alone. And that was nature's original fast food. You know, you pick it off the tree, you eat it. And, you know, there's so many delicious and wonderful, good for you fruits. Fruit's been giving a bad rap by some people that don't understand that fructose, a natural sugar that God made and buffered with fiber and vitamins and minerals and water, and you have to chew it and eat it and everything else. They're saying that that's the same as high fructose corn syrup. I promise you, they're not even close to impact on human physiology. You start looking at vegetables and they are very, very flexible. You can blend vegetables with protein. You can actually blend vegetables with starches. And by the way, nature typically blends fat and protein together. So those tend to mix pretty well as well. So what are the no-nos? Don't eat fruit with anything. Don't combine starches and proteins. Don't combine fats and starches either. There's a little mismatch on that as well. So, you know, that could be the idea of bread and butter, even though, let's face it, they blend well nicely. It's not necessarily the best blend for your digestive system. When you look, and then this part of the world, right? I'm in the Western world. Half of the population has chronic digestive disturbance. Half. And you know what? They don't have a good medical diagnosis for it. Half the people that see gastroenterologists, people that are supposed to specialize in the gut, they're basically, you know, diagnosed with irritable bowel. Well, what does that mean? You know, I listened to a speaker who was a comedian say, yeah, the guy told me I had an angry butthole. You know, irritable bowel. I thought that was a hilarious take on that. And what does that tell you? It tells you what you're putting in that gut is not appropriate. And here's the crazy thing. You look at medical education. I wrote an article about that years ago, but only 29 of 180 US medical schools had a required course in nutrition. And what were they taught? Basically the food pyramid, which is set up to make the drug companies money and processed food companies money. So, you know, learn to listen to your body. I've said now for decades, if I could teach people one thing, I teach them to listen to their body in every category, especially when it comes to food, drink, and movement.
Love that. Just to wrap up, then, Dr. Bob, we've talked at length over the last number of years about the power of medicinal mushrooms. These really are superfoods, superly nutritiously dense foods found in nature, not to be confused with domestic mushrooms, but actually medicinal mushrooms. But these have very, very unique compounds that really just take your health and performance game to the next level. We've partnered with a company that have patented the purest form of this in the world and infuse it in a way that people love to do, which is coffee and tea. Genius idea. Hats off to Mr. Bernie Chua for coming up with the idea of putting the most, I believe, researched medicinal mushroom on earth, i.e. being reishi, and putting it inside of something that people never forget to do. Because as you mentioned on any protocol with your athletes, it doesn't matter how great it is, it's only as effective as its compliance. And this was a win-win for you and your client base, for me and my client base, and for anyone else out there who is looking to up their athletic performance alongside of getting dialed in on the nutritional pyramid. You've got to get the basics down. This is going to give you that extra edge for multiple aspects of your well-being and performance. But it seems the king, as it's been documented in history, Dr. Bob, is reishi. We do have lion's mane and cordyceps as well. Just love you to touch on probably just for time reasons, because I know you could lecture for 4 days nonstop on this. Yeah. Just the biggest takeaways for athletic performance then for reishi and also for cordyceps and lion's mane.
Well, when we talk about all those, my big things for athletic performance, focus. Actually, all three of these medicinal mushrooms are great for focus. Lion's mane probably has the greatest data on that, but reishi's also proven. You want to have fuel and energy efficiency, and they have the micronutrients. They balance the acid alkaline system. They reduce the stress on the body, and that certainly has energy efficiency. We want anti-inflammatory actions. Reishi, more than a dozen proven mechanisms. And they even have studies on pain, which is somewhat related to inflammation, but they use people with rheumatoid arthritis, and they compared reishi in a double-blind placebo-controlled trial to the top drug, and people that consume reishi had the best pain relief. And a lot of that is going to be the anti-inflammatory action, but it's also a known immunomodulator. And by the way, cordyceps, same deal, lion's mane as well. Acid alkaline buffering, reishi gets the award on that, but all the medicinal mushrooms are alkalizing. And then finally, recovery. And is that sleep? Is that cellular repair? Is it detoxification? It's actually all of the above. And again, each of these medicinal mushrooms, and by the way, you showed that table that there were some other mushrooms on there as well. Hey, medicinal mushrooms are in a very special class. They're very powerful. We just are using the three most powerful that are available, but I'll tell people they're going to do pretty okay with any high quality medicinal mushroom.
Yeah, and this is really about putting this to the test, and really trying this. I had a client over today, Dr. Bob, who is trying the Royal for the first time, which is the fusion. We've won a global award for Best Organic Coffee 2022 with our king, guys. So if you want to try this, drop us a coffee mug in the comments for info on our one box experience. Put this to the test. Get it in your system. Listen, pay attention. Check out our self-assessment sheet as well. We can send to you to monitor your progress. So highly recommend the king with the spores, reishi spores. But the Royal for athletes as well. We spoke briefly about Eliud Kipchoge as well. who we spoke about having set the first sub 2 hour marathon, was using our reishi red tea as well, which has cordyceps in it. But this is a great option for you coffee drinkers who want to increase your athletic performance. I personally would use two. So why have one or the other? Because you're getting the reishi spores here. So coffee mug in the comments if you'd like to try out our one box experience. Just want to pop up Eliud Kipchoge here. I'll find this slide on Eliud here. But how powerful is that to have that in your arsenal as an athlete? Or not even as an athlete, just someone who would like to increase their energy production, Dr. Bob, because at the end of the day, if you don't have the energy to get the things done in your day, you're going to be dragging your heels.
Yeah, well, Eliud drank our red tea throughout, and that's very, very powerful. And cordyceps is exceptionally powerful for endurance athletes. It improves the testosterone cortisol ratio. What's so fascinating about this individual here breaking the first 2 hour marathon, there's plenty of people that said, you know what, it wasn't fair the way he did it, because he did have pace setters. He ran at sea level. He ran on a very good day. He ran on a surface that was very, very friendly to him and everything else. And for all the naysayers, every single one of them, I actually provided individual comments. Okay, if this isn't so great, you do it. Go ahead. We'll give you the same conditions. You break that 2 hour marathon. And I'll tell you what, if it depends on how speedy you are, since I ruptured my Achilles, his pace for 26.2 miles is about my highest speed achievable. And you start looking at that and you go, holy cow, how is that even possible? Well, he's a very special soul. There are some very elite athletes out there, but he had I'll call it the attunement with his body to realize that when he put our reishi red tea in the system, he performed better, recovered better, could train harder, longer. And you combine that, you've got a winning formula for success.
There we go. Beautiful. Well, you know what? I just seeing that as well as seeing it, he just clipped it by shy of 20 seconds off of the sub 2 hour. What a feeling that must have been, getting over the line. And you know what, guys, whatever line you're looking to get over in life, I'm sure we can help you, make that a more beautiful, enjoyable, and energetically charged journey for you. So the ball is in your court, guys. We shared some info with you. Drop a coffee mug in the comments if you'd like to try our one box experience. We'll be circling back around to more of these topics over the coming weeks. So we're looking forward to getting any questions answered around this topic. So if you do have any questions as well around eating right and having some more guidance in those areas, please also drop us a message, maybe with a bicep. If you need any help in your eating journey, then also drop us a message, because I'm sure between myself and Dr. Bob, we can send you some really great info on those areas as well. So Dr. Bob, go back to what you have to do. Great to have you on these calls, and we will see you next week for more topics around living your best life.
My
so
daughter
have a great one, guys. Speak to you very, very soon. Of course.
You know what? I won't be available for the call next week. We're returning from Vegas. So from Lexi's wedding. So next Tuesday.
Of course. I know that. Sure.
But maybe we'll record in advance.
That's allowed, Dr. Bob. That's absolutely allowed.
Thank you for that.
Well, that's what I meant. Yeah, we can get some content out. That is absolutely for sure. But have an amazing time, and I'm sure you will have an absolute blast with the whole family. You deserve it. So, guys, we'll see you on next week on our next call. So have a great one, and speak to you guys soon.
Very good. Thank you. Bye for now.
Ciao for now. Just ending stream.